very happy that you have invited me to deliver this particular lecture, and I'm thankful to yourself, Supriya ma'am, Rudraksha Sakarkar sir, and all the yogi and yogini that are assembled here. So I can see so many yogini here, mostly all the yoga abhyasi, they are here. And this topic is very interesting because mind matter consciousness, long back we had pondered over that and we had discussed some very important aspects of these three. And again, after some time, we are again discussing these matters. And now I would like to share my presentation. Can I, ma'am? Can I share PPT?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Huh? Thank you.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you so much. Yeah. Yes. Can you see the slide, please?
Yes, sir. We can see the slide, but yes. Now we can see properly.
Yeah. Thank you. So this is mind matter consciousness, and a very uh, typical word, matter and consciousness, because all our efforts have been to understand these matter and consciousness, and our people in India also made great efforts to understand what is around, what is inside, and is there anybody who is controlling these two. So basically, all our speculations, all our theories, all our systems, now everything that revolves around only three things: the world, the individual self, and if there is a different energy called God, that God energy. So ultimately, these three interest all scientists, all philosophers, and artists also, because the way of connecting with these, either with either the world or the self, so that effort itself becomes either art or science or philosophy. So we have been observing that people have made efforts and have got some identity, like some are known as philosophers, some are known as scientists, some other are known as mystics. But after all, if you observe their efforts, you can easily understand that some people are so much worried about the world, so much engrossed in the world. Some other people are so much engrossed in extracting the essence of the self or the God. So, this way we understand that ultimately these people have made efforts to make us understand these things: what is the world, what is the consciousness or the self, and what is the supreme power. So you please keep in mind that these three play a pivotal role in all philosophical systems and sciences also. So if you just go through the history of science, you find that right from the time of Democritus, the scientists made efforts. They did research on this particular aspect of the matter, that what it is ultimately, because the matter is tangible, but we cannot say that this alone is the reality. There may be reality lurking behind. So with this idea only, the great scientists of the yore, they had put all efforts and they tried to understand the true nature of the matter and true nature of the self, true nature of the supreme power. Some people say that there is only one, either the consciousness or the matter. So even in this particular aspect, if Shankaracharya is to be called as the Advaiti, because he is the absolute monist who believes in the reality of only one Brahman. But in this particular direction, if you analyze, that the Charvaka will also become an Advaiti, because he believes only in the matter. So he is a kind of Advaiti, he is also a different kind of Advaiti. And Democritus made efforts, and he had shown to the world that the matter is composed of atoms, the indivisible units of matter. So he had gone to the core of the matter and divided that and said, further it cannot be divided. And the ultimate indivisible part of the matter, unit of the matter, is atom, he has named. And later, many centuries, people have been working on that, trying to understand that, trying to put that into practice also. And later, uh, maybe the time of Rutherford, Dalton, and others. So the atomic structure was further clearly known to the scientists, that it is not indivisible atom that Democritus had supposed. This particular atom also is composed of something, and they had gone to the state of this nucleus with all these electron, proton, neutron. And later, of course, the 1895 or so, the electron was discovered, and later proton. And very surprisingly, the antimatter theory had uh, come out. Antimatter, that is like electron, there is anti-electron or positron. Similarly, there are other also like antiproton, etc. So this way, the antimatter concept was also formed, and thus maybe 2-3 thousand years, the science had made a very great journey to the exploration of the matter, and finally they have come to the subtlest particles of the matter. But in particle physics also, they themselves have confessed that we cannot say that this is the ultimate stage of matter, or we have come to the ultimate building block of the universe, because to this date, this may be the ultimate block, but we don't know after 500 years or 1,000 years, what will come up again. The nature will show itself in different phases. So therefore, the maybe one phase of the nature has not yet been manifested. So therefore, we cannot say that this is the ultimate. We can say that today this is the ultimate. And that's why the classical physics of Newton is replaced with the physics of Einstein. And later, Einstein is also challenged. So many theories of Einstein are also challenged. So we understand that whatever we know today, the 21st century, as the nature of matter, is the latest information on the matter. But after 1,000 years, nobody will be sure, because Democritus, during his period, people never dreamt of the time when the further subtle core layers of matter would be explored. So such things happen. So therefore, the modern science also is making all possible efforts to understand the matter. Then when it comes to mind, because this also baffles, because I speak, you listen, I create some impressions, I get some impressions, and you also get some impressions, and you carry these impressions and you work on that, and you deduct something from that, and that is applying your logic, reasoning, you get some knowledge from that, and your life will be decided on that. So thus, there is something functioning as mind. This is also very puzzling reality of the matter. So this mind, whether it is the part of consciousness or part of the mind, so this is also another interesting topic to the scientists and philosophers as such. And consciousness, of course, Descartes and others have limited themselves to the study of mind, and they concluded that consciousness is nothing but mind. So they could not see beyond. Even or Carl Jung and others also, they could not see beyond. Even when Carl Jung, of course, he was influenced by the yoga philosophy and had contributed very positively in this field. But still, you can see that they could not understand what our Yoga Bhashya, Yoga Sutra, and other yoga commentators were speaking about. So finally, consciousness somewhere they wanted to accommodate. And thus in the Western philosophy we find that the mind was accommodated in the matter, and consciousness was accommodated in the mind, and ultimately everything becomes material. So it so happened that there was a time when some people were in favor of the matter and some other were in favor of the mind, and there were big arguments also. And they were saying always the mind is ultimate, they were saying matter is ultimate. And of course there was a kind of agreement or compromise between them. And when they came together, so it was decided, so if matter is everything, we don't mind. If mind is everything, it doesn't matter. So that kind of compromise was to be made. But in philosophy, especially when we talk about the yoga philosophy, we understand that the the ancient philosophers had given a very proper treatment to the concept of mind, matter, consciousness, and uh, they have given us the reasoning to understand these three separately, distinctly, with all their characteristics. But the ultimate goal of human life is also mentioned, and very emphatically it is explained in the Yoga Sutra. So that we will see in the coming slides. Now, this is mind, matter, and consciousness we will be talking about. And in this, yeah, in this journey, we will be discussing so many things. And actually, any philosophical journey or scientist's journey that begins with interrogation. See, Sato Moolam Anvicha, Satah Imaf Prajaf Prajayante says the Chandogya Upanishad. So ultimately, you have to interrogate, you have to inspect, examine, look into that, and give some time for that. So this is Anveshana. So this later becomes Anvikshiki. So this interrogation is very important. And this interrogation basically revolves around the four metaphysics. What is out there? If I see water, what is exactly water? It's not just Shitasparshavatyaha apaha, but it is H2O, hydrogen, oxygen. Then what is hydrogen? What is oxygen? What is their combination? It is whether it is ionic or covalent. So all these matters, they actually interest. And as we get into the deeper aspect of this, so we get to the metaphysical understanding of the matter, not just physical. Physical is what is offered to the senses, but metaphysical is uh, at present even science does not talk about metaphysics, it is only physics. But metaphysics is the subject matter of philosophy. What is out there? Because the galaxies, the universe, multi-universe, and from the micro atom to the macro galaxies and universes, what is that after all? For whom? And when I try to know what is out there, then I need a tool, then I need a means to understand that. Otherwise, my desire will remain as a desire. What's out there? I don't have a proper mean. I don't have a proper method or any instrument or a kind of path to reach there. That's why epistemology is there. Epistemology is how, what, and how. How do I know about it? How? So if you have a very well harnessed instrument, a very well treated and designed method to know something, then there is a guarantee that if your tool is good, then your result will be good. So this way, epistemology talks about the means to get to the reality. So whether it is by withdrawing ourselves that we reach the reality, or whether it is by way of expressing ourselves through knowledge that we reach the reality, or through bhakti, that is emotion, or through mystic way. So what is that through which we can connect ourselves with the reality and be one with that? So the systems of philosophy have devised their own method, and they have apparently they have separated themselves from the other for some reasons. But otherwise, when we compare as a third person, aloof, away from the from any system, if we compare all the systems, we understand that these are all presenting a kind of systematic stage by stage evolution of a thought. So that's why we cannot deny the relative importance of any system. And in this process, I am also involved. And it is not just knowledge like the Western philosophy that I talk about knowledge, but when it comes to practical practice of that, I need not practice that, I only preach it. In Western philosophy, you may find that kind of approach, as Will Durant also says in the Story of Philosophy. But when it comes to Indian thinkers, Indian philosophers, you cannot expect Shankaracharya sitting in a theater and enjoying with popcorn. You cannot expect Bhagavad Ramanuja enjoying in a park with somebody. No, because they preach that which they can practice, and they practice, and thus they stand themselves as a good exemplar, a kind of quintessence for others. So this is your involvement, and this is the subject matter of ethics. What should I do? See, I have the tool, I have something as the target, but now I have to place myself in that. So what kind of preparation is expected from me? In what way I should be prepared, whether it is physical, psychological, spiritual? So in what way I am expected to receive that spiritual knowledge of the reality? So in this, you remember the Kathopanishad, that it's a navirato duscharita, nashanto nasamahitaha, nashantam anasovapi prajnanena enam apnuyat. So the Kathopanishad very explicitly states the importance of ethics. It says, unless you are self-controlled, unless you are self-disciplined, unless you have a target and you have some chastity, you cannot expect a direct experience of the reality. You may, at last, you may get a glimpse of that in the form of a knowledge, information. Yes, anybody can get information, but very few people get transformation. So we are talking about transformation, and that is possible only through the moral life, ethical life. Then comes aesthetics. What can life be? What can life be like? So you talk about aesthetics. You make it like an art piece. After all, it is your life, and you can make it a very good art piece, a very beautiful aesthetic, or you can make it horrible also. So it all depends. And these four branches deal with all the matter of philosophy, and one should interrogate. And in this process, we understand that one, we have the objective world, and other, the subjective, that is subject self. So two are there. We cannot deny the seer and the seen, drashta and drushya, the knower and the known. So these two realities cannot be denied. But in Yoga Shastra, they say that the objective world is drushya, a product of matter, but this drashta is not a product of matter. He is actually communicating with the matter, and he is drashta as pure consciousness. So therefore, now whatever is the gross, that should be the point of interrogation first. Therefore, we start with the world experience. So what we look around, what we communicate with, that is all the objective world. And the objective world is a matter of experience to all, and because we live in that. And this objective world is a projection of mind, as it is stated in the Buddhism. In Yoga Shastra also, they believe that it is mind that connects and that says that there is an objective world. Otherwise, there is no chance of knowing any objective world. Just like a patient in coma, a patient in trance, any person in trance. So there is no question of knowing about the objective world, because the connector is missing, and the connector is mind. So the latent impressions created by mind are carried by mind, And this particular, the cycle of impressions, vasana, this itself is world experience, as Yoga Vasishta says. So ultimately, what is world experience? This is the mind functioning on the force of the latent impressions called vasana and projecting something as gross objective world. So this we should underline, very important. And these impressions, they reside in the mind and they function. And in this particular aspect, the Yoga Shastra comes close to the Vedanta also, when Mandukya Upanishad Gaudapadhikarika tells us that the mind creates a world objectively in the wakeful state and creates a world only as impression in the dream state. So both are the states on the basis of which you can ascertain what is real. They say both are unreal, but relatively the wakeful state appears to be real. So in this particular one, mind is creating something, mind is projecting something in the wakeful state. So it appears to be objectively real. But when the same mind projects something in the dream state, and that particular experience appears to be real till it is totally mitigated or rejected in the wakeful state. So they say that the dream state is temporarily real, but the person believes that it is absolutely real when he is in that state. But when he comes out of that state into the wakeful one, he automatically rejects that. Similarly, the entire world experience is only Dvaita, and a point of time will definitely come in one's life, and this will be rejected, and he will be totally posed in his true nature, that is Swarupa Avasthiti. And in this process, when the mind is functioning on the force of the impressions, the flow is like river water. The mind just functions like the water of river. So it is actually motivated by the impressions, propelled, and the mind leads to actions, and we do good or bad in the society. Then those actions will naturally yield results. That's what Yoga Shastra tells, that satimule tad vipakaha jatyayur bhogaha. So ultimately, some result will be there, getting some good or bad birth, a body in a particular species. Then, as an outcome of the result, there will be reactions. So the actions will have natural reaction, and the reactions will definitely lead to further impressions, and these impressions constitute the mind. So ultimately, mind is nothing but the impressions that we carry. So that's why towards the end of the Yoga Sutra, Patanjali Maharshi very clearly tells us that it is Desha Kala, है ना, जाति देश काल व्यवहितानामपि आनंतर्यम smriti samskarayo rekarupatvat. When he explains that, it is very clear that yesham abhave tadabhavaha. So if you get rid of the vasana, the mind will be totally absent, because after all it is impressions. So thus they are talking about the impressions, and for that they have recommended, prescribed the chittavritti nirodha, and for chittavritti nirodha several other practices are also recommended in the Yoga Shastra. So this we should bear in mind, that when we are talking about the realization, the hurdle is mind, and the only way is also mind. Because the mind can take us near the reality, or the same mind can take us away from the reality. Depends on what kind of impressions that the mind carries. So that's why Shankaracharya also explains, when he comments on the mantra Manasaiva idamaptavyam, and another mantra in the Kenopanishad and Taittiriya Upanishad also, Yato vacho nivartante aprapya manasa saha natatram chakshur gacchati na vag gacchati no manaha. So while explaining all these, he tries to resolve the apparently contradictory views, like somewhere it is stated that mind is the means, somewhere it is stated that you cannot get the reality with the help of mind. So how to reconcile with these two? So Shankaracharya tells, when it is stated that the mind is the means, you understand that the mind that is pure, a pure mind. And when they say that the reality cannot be achieved with the help of mind, you understand it is impure mind. So ultimately, the pure or impure mind will take us near the reality or away from the reality. But what is this purity or impurity? Then finally, they talk about the impressions only, otherwise, there is no purity or impurity. And in this process, you remember the Sankhya Yoga has given a kind of evolution. According to them, in their view, the mind is an evolution of matter. So, therefore, mind is also matter. You please mind it. Mind is also matter because it is an evolute of matter. What is matter after all? So the Sankhya Yoga philosophy explains to us that ultimately there are three forces. Arvinda Ghosh calls them three natural forces. They are Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. And these three are functioning in proper coordination and sometimes dominating each other. And they are actually Paraspara, Janana, Mithuna. All these are there in the three forces. And these three forces cause all creation. And mind, that means the thinking faculty, is also an evolution of this through ego principle. And the ego principle in turn is also an evolute of the deciding principle, the prime awareness called Mahat. So this way, there is first awareness, then from awareness, there is a self-identity as Aham. From self-identity, there is thought further in the form of mana or chitta, because in yoga philosophy, mind and chitta are same. So thus you understand that the mind is matter, it is material. And in this process, the dead matter or the inert matter cannot produce itself all alone. It needs the participation of the Purusha. And therefore, they have postulated that there is pure consciousness as Purusha, and because of its involvement or the participation, the matter evolves into many. So, this multiplicity in the world is a result of the matter Prakriti only, but in association with the Purusha. So, thus, there is a kind of agreement between these two, consciousness and matter. And ultimately, the entire world experience is an outcome of these two, the combination of the Purusha and Prakriti. So, therefore, when these have come together, the chitta mind, that is also activated, and it connects with the external world. So this is the process they have believed. And when we come to think about these two, Prakriti, Purusha, matter, consciousness, because their combination has led to creation. Okay, but when we just get into the true nature of that, we understand that matter is lame. Consciousness is blind. Consciousness is lame. Matter is blind. That's the problem. How? Because matter can walk. That means it has the rajoguna required for action. So you can expect some action from the matter, not from the consciousness. Okay. Then, but matter does not have the knowledge. Matter does not have the required drishti. Then consciousness is required. But consciousness, it is nirguna. Therefore, it has no force for action because all action takes place in the matter only. So, matter has action but no direction. Consciousness has knowledge and direction but no action. Then, Sankhya Yoga philosophy tells us that when they come together, then with the help of matter, the consciousness expresses itself, and ultimately, this is creation. But of course, each philosophy has its some lacunae, and though the later commentators and other thinkers have made all efforts to fill the lacunae, but still you find that some areas of each philosophical system remain unanswered, something missing in that. Similarly, in the Sankhya philosophy, you find that some points are missing and they have not properly answered. What are the three forces that the matter is composed of? Sattva, that is total vibration knowledge. Rajas, that is the mobility or action. Tamas, that is inertia or control. So in this way, these three forces, like the brake, clutch, and accelerator, like in the vehicle, so these also function. And when they are together and they make a kind of nucleus, and that guna nucleus is Prakriti, because Prakriti doesn't have any objective existence apart from the three guna. Sattva, Rajas, Tamasam, Samyavastha, Prakriti. So that state of being in equilibrium itself is Prakriti. And when there is Srishti, there is no Prakriti. There is only Vikriti. That is the problem. And this Prakriti is, you cannot clearly say whether it is existent or non-existent. It is like the singularity in the physical sciences, that you cannot objectively state what it is. Neither existence nor non-existence, neither real or unreal. It is unmanifest, and it is not any trace to any other thing. See, when we talk about the ahankara can be taken as an indication of the mahat. Mahat can be taken as an indication of the prakriti, but prakriti cannot be any indication further, because it is not a product. Generally, the product functions as an indication of the cause. The dhuma that is born from the fire, that plays a very important role in inference, that the on the presence of the smoke, you surmise or you infer the presence of the fire, because it is born from that. So whatever is born from something, so naturally that functions as a inferential sign for that. So here Prakriti being the ultimate, that's what the Sankhya Sutra says, ki amulasya moolasya amulatvad amulam moolam. So ultimately, the final building block of the universe cannot be any trace of anything, because it is final. And if you postulate some other thing, then that also will lead to some further postulation. And it is the ultimate principle, the Prakriti. And when that Prakriti is manifesting itself in various forms, generally the appearance is fivefold. We start with the specific property, generally whatever we perceive outside in the world. So that is Rupa, Rasa, Gandha, Sparsha, Shabda. So these are the five. And our senses are so designed to get this knowledge, the sensory perception. So the specific property of each is matter of experience first. But if we develop the prowess to get into these subtler states of matter, we can understand that below the specific property, there is generic property. So each part of the matter in the world possesses some generic property. Like water, it is specific property, but generic property is also there. It is a dravya, it is a padartha. Then we get to the tanmatra of that particular matter, that means material thing. Then we get to the guna. So this way, from the grosser to the subtler we can get. If specific, you take prithvi, apaha, tejaha, then generic property, you get to the dravyatva, etc. Then tanmatra, then guna. And when you have come to the three guna, now the question arises, what is the purpose of the guna getting manifested in the form of specific property through tanmatra and generic? So ultimately you have to get to the purpose of that. And this is not the prerogative of science. Only philosophy can discuss about it, because science deals with whatever is there and whatever must be there. But philosophy deals with all that, whatever can be there. So this way, the purpose of all creation, the purpose of all manifestation is discussed in the philosophy. And in this, we understand that the modern science also has tried to understand mind, but they have stopped somewhere in the brain itself and said brain is the place of mind. And in the yoga philosophy, we have difference between mind and consciousness and brain and mind. Brain, mind, and consciousness, when we say these three are separate entities, the brain and mind can be taken as one, but brain is physical, mind is abstract. And the consciousness alone is real according to yoga philosophy, because consciousness is without modification. It does not transform into any other thing. It is pure, it is eternal, and it is the self. When it comes to mind, it is a modification. It transforms. It is impure, non eternal, and ultimately non self. So, therefore, you cannot compare brain physical. About 1,000 billion nerves are there. They communicate through synapses and receive clues from the environment, form an appropriate plan of action, and direct other activities of the brain and body. So these are all actually neurological. And now people are trying to understand the uh, the neurological aspect of mind and consciousness. And I have told you that all these activities in the brain, concentration, planning, problem solving, speech, taste, language, reading, vision, hearing, smell, all this. That means the special sensory perceptions and the general cognitions. So all these are now found to be rooted in the brain. Brain is physical, of course, but nothing of these is physical. Brain is physical, but all these are not physical. They are there, and all these together are called the mind. So all intelligence is rooted in brain only. And brain mind dualism, we understand that brain and mind cannot be taken as same, because brain is made up of nerve cells, blood vessels. Mind has none. Brain has a definite shape, mind has none. Brain can be touched and felt, mind cannot be. Brain has a definite place in the head, mind has no place anywhere. People say it has the place called brain. But when we say mind and chitta, we understand that the Western understanding of mind is not exactly what our Yoga Shastra uh, uh, says uh, through the word chitta. These people understand that chitta, in its special sense, is the faculty by which the mind first recalls to memory. So this is Woodruff uh, explanation of that, but he was obviously influenced by the Indian thought. Therefore, he said he was actually speaking in terms of Indian philosophy only. So he said chitta is the faculty. Hoare said chitta is soul. Simmer said chitta is whatever is experienced or enacted through the mind. He says, because Simmer says chitta and mind are different. Carl Jung said chitta is consciousness. Hoare said again, chitta is really no more than a mirror of the Purusha. It comes very close to the yoga philosophy, that he says it is mirror of the Purusha. So all these are their understanding of mind and chitta. But when it comes to the last concept, that the mind or chitta is self. The problem is mind self-aware? Because the sense of a self in the act of knowing is created, and that forms the basis for the first person perspective. And objective brain processes nit the subjectivity of the conscious mind. So when we say self-conscious, self-aware, can mind be self-aware? Yes, say the Western thinkers. No, says Patanjali. So Patanjali Maharshi says that mind natat swabhasam drishyatvat, mind or chitta cannot be suprakasha. It is not self-aware. It is only a drishya. That means it is also being absorbed by some other entity, and that is consciousness. And after all, there is no separate spectator for the movie in the brain. It is actually we are playing and we are being played. So the scene, seer, thought, thinker, everything is within this particular frame. Then what is consciousness? What is the place of consciousness? And how many types are there? How does it function? And mind consciousness relation, what is that? So it is really impossible to specify. What is consciousness? What it is? What it does? Why it has evolved? This is very fascinating but elusive phenomenon. Nothing worth reading has been written on it. Macmillan Dictionary of Psychology says, no, we cannot get any thorough, concrete information about it. But our Indian systems of philosophy, they have provided very dependable information on these. And on the basis of this, we can definitely improve ourselves, get to the reality. And I believe in one birth, we can be completely satisfied that we have obtained whatever is to be obtained. Like Jnayam, that is Tasya Saptadha Pranta Bhumi Prajna. This is the first Bhumi that Yat Jnayam Tat Sarvam Jnatam. So this is the first state of Karya Vimukti. We will definitely get it. And in the duo, consciousness is nothing more than the ability of our brain. That's what the Western thinkers say. Functioning brain is identical to a conscious mind. And Descartes also said, mind is consciousness and self-aware. But you understand that yoga system does not endorse such theory. Now, when we come to the brain function, there is abstract outside property, that is unified properties, qualia. They are the products of our consciousness. And that's why Max Planck, the greatest physics scientist, said, I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind it. Everything we talk about or regard as existing, that postulates consciousness, consciousness. Actually, I sometimes believe that Max Planck was a very great Upanishadic thinker, Upanishadic Rishi, Vedanta Rishi, and ultimately he had taken birth in somewhere in a Western country, because his understanding that comes close to the understanding of a great Maharshi. And the Sankhya Yoga view is different, because consciousness participates in matter's play and display. So consciousness and matter, the relation is also variously analyzed and understood in all these systems. And in this process, yoga says the mind and its products are seen, and the conditioned consciousness is the seer. Now you may say, in Vedanta only the consciousness is conditioned. How can you say that in yoga also it is the conditioned consciousness? Now you understand, vritti sarupya mitaratra tada drashtuhu swarupe avasthanam. So these sutras give us a hint that swarupa avasthana is possible when all the thought waves are separated. And when the mind is active and the consciousness is conditioned, then vritti sarupya is there. So therefore, all this play is only of the conditioned consciousness. But as such, the consciousness is pure. In that form, it is not any seer. It sees through mind or thinking faculty. Shuddhopi pratyayanupashyaha. That's what Yoga Sutra says. And if this particular one is withdrawn, there is only the consciousness. And this is the relation between mind and consciousness. So some people say it is the product of firing neurons. It is basic building block of nature, and it presents at all levels of the fabric of reality. And it is the ability of our brain to acquire information. A functioning brain is identical to a conscious mind. So I have summarized some previous discussions, but what yoga says is different from that one. Mind is distinct from consciousness, and mind cannot be self-aware. Mind is material, consciousness is non-material. Mind ceases to function with vairagya. So there is an end to mind, chitta nasha. But you cannot say chaitanya nasha. Consciousness is eternal. Mind is ubhayatmakam indriyam manaha. Sense of cognition, sense of action. But consciousness is not any indriya. So this way, consciousness is the reality beyond brain and mind. It is the pure consciousness as energy, immutable, imperishable, and eternal. And due to the force called avidya, it comes into the contact of matter through mind and gets apparent influence, vritti sarupyam. And because of that, there are several experiences and reactions. It is apparent because the consciousness cannot be truly influenced. Because, see, when we say that the mind influences the consciousness in the form of the matter, it cannot directly influence. Of course, the consciousness cannot be influenced in the true sense of the influence, but it is apparent. So there we come close to the Adhyasa theory of Vedanta. And ultimately, when it comes to the self, I am not what I think or feel. The thinking, feeling entity is mind. Then who am I? I am consciousness, energy. That's what Shankaracharya also said in one of his beautiful sutra, stotra, that is Sushuptyaika Siddha, Shiva Kevaloham. So I am the absolute consciousness. And when all the mental, intellectual faculties stop, I remain in myself as the absolute consciousness. I am distinct from my thoughts and feelings, and I am the source of thoughts also. The mind has no form other than the functions: perception, inferential knowledge, verbal knowledge, misapprehension, fiction, sleep, memory, cognition. Patanjali Maharshi has given only five. All the other can be included in them, but these are all the functions. And mind has no separate existence. So whatever you call, you are perceiving, you are inferring, you are verbally communicating, you are misapprehending, you are just uh, see fancying, you are sleeping or remembering or cognizing. So all these are only the functions of mind, not of the consciousness. Consciousness is the power supplier, that's all. And there is consciousness beyond mind. We should believe in that. Then only all our efforts in yoga practice will have a direction. Otherwise, if everything is mind and mind is totally removed, then who am I? Where do I remain? And if all yoga leads to self destruction, nobody will prefer that. So that's why yoga is not self destruction. Yoga is only chitta destruction. And finally, it will lead to consciousness. And from wheel of ignorance to the super consciousness, we should raise ourselves. And for that, regular, sincere practice of physical and spiritual yoga is necessary. Why regular? Okay. Why sincere? Because we are all not sincere to ourselves. We mostly carry the masks for the society. We want to show that we are greater than what the society thinks, or bigger, greater, loftier, all that. But this is actually not the reality. So, therefore, removing all the masks, when we look at ourselves, whatever we are, bad or good or sinful or not sinful, we are that. And therefore, sincere practice, that means clinging to all the rules of the yoga, Patanjali yoga or Hatha yoga, that is very important. One who succeeds in this effort leads a contentful life, then he will contribute to a harmonious and happy life on this planet. So, this is the essence of the Yoga Shastra, and that's why the Upanishadic seers, they pray to the energy in the form as Asato Ma Sadgamaya. Gamaya, please lead me. Me, Ma means lead, me. Gamaya means lead. So, Ma Gamaya means lead me. Asataha, from Asat, untruth, to Sat, means truth. So lead me from untruth to truth. Tamaso ma jyotir gamaya, lead me from darkness to light. Mrityor ma amritam gamaya, lead me from death to immortality. So ultimately, all the sacred literature, all the scriptures, like the Veda, Upanishad, and all the other Shastra, they want to help us get from the Asat to Sat, or from Tamas to Jyoti, or Mrityu to Amritatva. So ultimately, human life is destined for that. And the Purushartha, that means the ultimate goal of human life, should be this, that from the Mriti, Mrityu to Amritatva. Because ultimately, it is the death that scares everybody. So from death to immortality. And in this process, we should understand who actually gets death. Do I have death, or does the body have death? So this kind of understanding should take place, and all the scriptural knowledge should help us in this realization. And Mrityu is only to the body, then consciousness as Atma doesn't have any. And all my identity in this life is because of the body, because of the mind or intellect. And as such, I am pure consciousness. So, this is the ultimate message of all scriptures, including Yoga Darshana. And Yoga Shastra also tells us that Kaivalyam is the ultimate state of immortality. This is either Kaivalya, you can call it Amrutatva also, and we all should make efforts to get there. And all the other petty benefits like personality development or physical, psychological health is only a very, very trivial benefit in front of the Kaivalya. But everybody cannot aspire for Kaivalya. Everybody cannot be eligible to get that Kaivalya. So therefore, within our limitations, we try to understand yoga. That means from the perspective of Patanjali, and we try to place ourselves somewhere in this tradition of yoga, either asana, pranayama, dharana, dhyana, somewhere, and we put efforts to tread on the path of yoga, and ultimately we reach somewhere. And in this particular one thing is certain, that nehabhikrama nashosti pratyavayo navidyate. That's what Lord Krishna stated in the Bhagavad Gita, that in this path of spiritual life, even a step does not go futile, does not go waste. Even a step taken is not waste. And there is no obstacle also. That means you have taken a step, at least you have taken a step, you have made an effort, and that naturally gives its rewards. So this way, they have all explained to us the nature of the world, the self, the supreme power, and the direction of life, everything. And we owe a lot to our ancestors and all the great thinkers, and paying obeisances to all these great souls. I conclude here. Thank you all. Namaste.